Hi, you've tuned into State of South Asia, a podcast from Himal Southasian, where we have the best minds of the region to unpack crucial issues affecting our politics, cultures, environments, and societies. I'm your host, Nantara Narayanan, coming to you from Bangalore. On this episode, I speak to Sharda Ugra, a sports journalist also based in Bangalore, about the ICC Women's Cricket World Cup, the evolution of the game in recent years, what it says about women's sport in South Asia, the challenges that women cricketers still face, and what the future holds for aspiring women cricketers across the subcontinent. Before we go further, here's a reminder that Himal is an independent magazine completely free of government and corporate interest. Your support means the world to us. Help our in depth journalism by becoming a paying patron for as little as $5 per month. Visit our website, himalmag.com, and click on Support Himal. We're entering the final week of the ICC Women's Cricket World Cup, hosted jointly by India and Sri Lanka. The semi finalists have been determined, and the final will be held on November 2nd. Earlier this month, Himal contributor Tanushree Bhasin wrote about how this tournament could be India's biggest cricketing moment in over 50 years. An India win can make the game central to the country's sporting culture in the same way that men's cricket took off after the 1983 World Cup victory. And this might be true across South Asia. Teams from Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh performing well can do much for women's cricket in all these countries, given that it has long taken a backseat to the men's game. In another Himal piece, sports journalist Estelle Vasudevan writes about the simultaneous rise of Sri Lankan women's cricket and women in sports journalism and adjacent fields. Right now, I'm joined by Sharda Ugra to talk about the state of women's cricket in India and the rest of South Asia and where it goes from here. Sharda is one of India's finest sports journalists and certainly one of the first women in the field, and she has been doing this for some 3 decades. Sharda, I'm delighted to have you on this podcast.
Thank you so much, Nantara. Great to be here. Great to be talking to Himal, to your audience, and supporting the good work that you guys do.
Sharda, first up, we're in the final leg of the tournament. And so, what have been the highlights for you? The shocks, any surprises, upsets, and particularly with the South Asian teams, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka?
As a sort of fellow South Asian, I do follow the women's teams of all the countries, not just India. It would have been good to have maybe another team pushing at least towards the end of the tournament in the final four. Sri Lanka's had a decent tournament. They had a very tough, their last game against Bangladesh was really close. The Bangladesh women are showing signs of progress, but you do need them to push ahead. Speaking of which, that was a thought we had about the Indians until yesterday's game, where they seem to have come through and are now pushing for a place in the final. And who knows, in this cross.
Shata, what has interest in the tournament been? I know a number of games have been washed out, but what have stadium turnouts and viewership been like, maybe compared to the previous World Cups? And of course, I don't think there's much of a comparison with the men's game, but just to put that into perspective as well.
Lot of similarity in terms of audience turnouts in the non-India games with reference to 2023. That there doesn't seem to be that much of a turnout. Again, it's proportionate to the numbers that are there in the men's game. If, say, India is not playing, what are the kind of numbers that you'll get at a men's game? And the women's game is proportionate to that in the sense of it might be 30% less or, as compared to that. For the India games, the numbers have been okay. Okay, good in many ways, but they've said that look, all tickets have been sold. So you would think that the whole stadium would be packed and will be standing room only, and it turns out that it's not. But having said that, I think in the India games in Indore, in Vizag, sometime in Guwahati, and in Navi Mumbai, the crowds have been good. They've supported the team well. That's been the way. I don't think the tournament is as much front and center of people's minds as it could have been. It's almost like the Women's World Cup was approached in the same manner when it came to marketing, like the Men's World Cup. That look, the crowds are going to turn up. People know it's fine. We'll just go about it in this manner. It's been a bit slipshod in that sense. So it's not like you see banners and hoardings and posters everywhere, which in a country where you're pushing the women's women's sport or the women's event that you're saying, you would expect. Maybe you needed to do not as little work as you did with the men's, but some sort of visible work there to be seen that, okay, that this is the game and this is how we're going to push it, because the women are much better sort of resourced at this point than they were even, say, maybe 10 years ago. And but in the sense that there's a certain amount of casual and laxity when it comes to pushing the women's game in an active manner. And we must also remember this is a 50 overs World Cup. So the 2020 numbers for women's matches, say in Navi Mumbai, where they played on Thursday, yesterday, against New Zealand, they had 40,000 people turn up for an India Australia women's match, which is the biggest number that we've seen. And two matches in a row, sort of 40,000 and 40,800, and those kind of numbers that you had. So you were not getting those. So more so the reason that you should have had much more active engagement with the public with what you're about to do. I know that they had, maybe I haven't looked, but I certainly haven't seen a lot of announcements about fan parks or any kind of other parallel kind of activity around the women's game. There is a certain sense of, oh, it'll be fine. People will turn up when they have to. It's that kind of almost casual, I think, kind of approach that's there. I haven't seen, but that said, I'm saying this everywhere. Whoever asked, the women's World Cup song is much better than the men's World Cup song, and it's shot better and it's presented better. It's a much nicer sort of presentation. But a lot of the other things have been fairly sort of chalta hai, like we say, in India, and the assumption that things are going to work out fine.
Right. And in terms of, sponsorships and ads, what has the interest been like in this tournament?
You've seen definitely a lot more, a little more, not I'd say a lot more. It's like WPL kind of scale of advertising, and you'll see a lot more, but you'll see a very few. Like you'll see a lot of Smriti Mandana's ads that are showing a lot, all around. You'll see Jemima Rodriguez a little bit. You'll see that kind of thing, but that kind of absolute aggressive kind of push that you needed to give, with your new stars, you're seeing it on TV programs, but out in the press, in that sense, something done in a smart manner. I think the WPL ads when the first season was held was so good and so sharp. But you're not seeing that kind of energy around advertising and marketing of this World Cup as I think it could have been. Um, it's not that there's a shortage of money at any end. I think it's just a shortage of interest in saying, look, you're doing me a favor by hosting the World Cup, now come on.
I have a friend's daughter who is very interested in the game, who has some aspirations of playing it professionally, at some point of time. And she's been following the tournament closely. And she made this observation. There was some ad, it had a former cricketer, an aging actor, and a model. She was telling her mother, this is the Women's World Cup. Why couldn't they get a woman cricketer in this?
Until now, you don't have to be very smart to market men's cricket in India. You and I could get into an office and we'll still be able to make money for the BCCI by marketing the game. The women's game needs a different approach. It needs a slightly different look at how you're going to present all this on not your official broadcast channels, but everywhere else, that people can't but notice that there is this event. Or in that sense, the representation is just really, it's a bit lazy, it's a bit sloppy. It's a bit of, and I think a lot of what people see, what again, it's a big generalization that I'm making, but as a lot of what the mass of public see as in women's cricket came through when the Indians lost to England after having virtually, nailed that chase, and then they just collapsed towards the end, and then the conversation became, we have given you so much money and still you are playing like this, so there's this thing of that there is almost like that they're doing a favor to the women cricketers by supporting them. So in that kind of approach, you see the way it comes through in advertising, and the fact that the young cricketer noticed there's no women cricketer there. It's a good thing, because say 10 years ago, no one would have thought of even having a woman cricketer in that space, so that is a sign of progress. And if I could just add, one of the other really good things about this World Cup has been that the presence, not just the representation of women everywhere in a game, is immense. You see them if they're umpires, they're match referees, they're officials, they're in the commentary panel. So it's there, it's seen, it's a common thing, and that is very, very important when you're bringing the game out to an audience, however they are placed. It becomes normal for women to be in this space, which is a great thing. It's a big relief in many ways, but it's fantastic, and I definitely feel very, very glad when I see. There's a lot of other sort of loopholes, but this is definitely something that is a big, big change, and you have to really welcome as to what this does to every young woman watching the sport who says, "Oh, I can be an umpire. I can do that. I can be anything in the game. I don't have to be invisible in that sense." So it's been really good in that sense.
Right. So, of course, India have qualified for the semi-final. They haven't won a World Cup yet in either format, the ODIs or the T20s. Would a World Cup title transform the game in India, or do you think that the WPL actually has a wider impact?
I think the WPL has a wider impact because it's every year. A World Cup come once every. It'll be great for if the Indian women win it, honestly, because I think uh, televising their game was very, very important. Putting it out in the audience for people to see, as they did in 2017, that was, I think, the game changer in a sense in India, because the general audience, the average cricket fan, could switch on the television and say, "Hey, these girls are great. They're fantastic. Just look at, just I didn't know we had this talent. I did." And what the WPL has done, it's given a chance for people outside the official BCCI structure, state teams, and so on, to go out and look for talent, and for talent to come to them. And you're seeing that talent presenting itself in the team. You're seeing it in WPL and so on. And it took so long, while all the generalization franchises we know were very, very keen on having a women's 2020 league, and it was delayed for as long as you possibly could have, until the Pakistan Cricket Board said we are going to have a women's T20 franchise as well, and that's when everything suddenly, there was a big sort of push in India. What happens if the women win the World Cup in about 10 days time? You will get a great surge. What the women will get was a great sense of satisfaction that we are able to be the best team in the world on the day. That will be big for them because they have been sort of near thereabouts performers. The difference in, say, the standards of that the Australians play at and the rest of the world and India plays at is just because of this sort of administrative backup that they've had for far longer. That they've been there. They're getting the same sort of resources and all that the men's team is getting, and the Indians have fallen back in that. They're playing catch up in that sense. So at one point, an Australian person in cricket said to me that, if the BCCI gets its act together, not just in men's cricket, women's cricket, he said we are all in the shits. They're done for. We are like, it's going to be so tough for us to keep up with how they're doing. But and when you see a gap, and you know what that gap is in a sense. That's not to say that there has not been a great deal of movement in the women's game over the last decade or so.
Right. So are you saying that, the gap between the top teams, which is Australia, England, South Africa, New Zealand, and India, and the rest of the teams, is it like the same as the men's game, which is basically about who has the money?
I think it's about who has the money, who has the expertise. So what happens with money is you can have money, but you can't count. You don't use the expertise with the money that you have, and say at this level we could also see a sort of a failing and a kind of a lapse at the International Cricket Council level to say that how do we spread our resources that everyone who doesn't have them is given the best possible chance. I'm just back from the World Men's Volleyball Championship in the Philippines. I just want to give you an example of what this organization. I was a guest of the International Volleyball Federation, so they have something they called it's called an empowerment program, and they support through finance, through technical expertise, and through actual like physical sort of skill development. They support various other countries to sort of and then they have a database in which they show where the money is gone, how much money has been spent. On average, they spent $50,000, whatever it was. And in their world championships, the men and the women's world championships were within a couple of weeks of each other. They had the teams that made the knockouts. So that's you're saying it's about 16 teams make the knockouts round of 60. In the men's, 8 of the teams were empowerment supported teams. And in the women's, 7 of those 16 teams were supported by the international federation. And you could see right there, and these are teams that don't have a tradition of volleyball, or they don't have volleyball is not their number one sport, but it is just that the top, because they wanted to have a fairer competition. That's what the volleyball guys said. Look, let's try and do this. Let's create this little program that we're able to do this, and you could see it. So a lot of the major teams were upset, and upset as in upset game wise, and they exited the competition early, and people were saying, oh, we're so surprised, and the volleyball guy said, we are not surprised. This is our investment. This is our investment in these teams that have played off. And that's the kind of investment that you would want to put back into cricket, in teams all across the board, that are not the big money teams. They're not the big three in the men's game that we call England, Australia, and India. And you can see that gap because of this. All through my career as a sports journalist, I used to wonder as an Indian, why don't we get Olympic medals? Huh? And there's no other reason. It's just lack of governance and lack of ambition and lack of intent, commitment to supporting the sport, supporting the athlete per se. And you're seeing this happening to the teams in women's cricket as well. And there are a lot of good work that's happening at the ICC level with a lot of the other teams. We saw a little clip on the matches about working that with Thailand and so on and so forth. But what about the teams that are there amongst your old uh, amongst the older nations that you have? So teams like Sri Lanka, teams like Pakistan, teams like Bangladesh, or even the West Indies. The West Indies are very good with this at one. But how do you get them to and so that your competition becomes equal, committed everywhere?
In 2023, the International Cricket Council, the ICC, announced equal prize money between the men's and the women's game. Has this given the women's international game a leg up? Has there been any difference in this tournament, in the World Cup, for example? What's it been like?
To me, showing money as a sign of supporting any kind of development in sport is it's a fig leaf in many ways. It's just a thing that you're throwing money at the problem. You're saying, this is how generous we are. This is how good we are. Look, we're equal. You need to know what are the payment structures across the board that are going to work. How are the cricket boards that have cricketers? What do they pay them? Are you trying to make sure that those pay grades are getting equal all over the world as much as you can possibly make it? What is price? I mean, Australia is going to win something. The time where you had these upsets and that's over in world sport. The big upsets that some small team comes from nowhere. I think Greece came and won a Euro Championships many years ago, I think 2004 in football. So those days are over because sport is now so professionalized and so professionally run that it does depend on who has the money and how that money is spent. If it's spent meaningfully, giving money to the winners if it's the same people that are going to turn up in the finals and the semi-finals, and where's the money going? It's just an open gesture. I mean, it's just a show off. Not show off. What's the word I used? I said it's just a.
The fig leaf.
It doesn't mean anything.
Right. And the ICC's announcement came after the BCCI, the Board of Cricket Control in India, announced equal match fees for men and women. I think that was in October 2022. But you wrote, I think earlier this year, that commitment to pay parity has become a little fuzzy. The BCCI is not really transparent about retainerships. Can you explain what's going on there?
So the BCCI is saying we are giving equal money to men's and women's in match fees is they're right that okay, the international fees, this is what the men will get, this is what the women will get, and that might be equal at every level. 15 lakhs a test match or whatever that number is, but women don't play test matches that much. A retainer is the money that you give as a board to your top 20 or 25 players to keep that's like their payroll, that you are on that scheme because you are part of us, which means that if there's any injury caused to you, we will look after you. This is like a backup that we have. It's literally like a contract that you sign with those players, which is different from the match fees. Those disparities are enormous. Basically, the retainers for the grade A for men is 7 crores, 5 crores, 3 crores, and 1 crore. And for the women, it is 50 lakhs, 30 lakhs and 10 lakhs.
It's a huge difference. And this is where the money makes a difference. It's not actually in the prize money at the end of the tournament.
And the prize money or even match fees, because they're not going to play that many one dayers. They're not going to play that many T20 one day international. So you're talking, that's the kind of figure that you're talking about. And when you even make this argument and you say that that's not, you haven't given them the same contract, what are you talking about? They'll tell you that, oh, I mean, why should the women be paid that? There is almost a reluctance to part with the BCCI's money with people down the line at the same time. So whether it's women cricketers, whether it's first class cricketers in the domestic scene, they keep juggling these numbers around. Let's say this is what it is, but it's not, and you are the richest board in South Asia, in the world, in the cricket world, and you are not going to set the example of uh, equity and of fair play with the women's and the men's game. Then who's going to do it? And if you're going to try and give us headlines every few months by saying these things, after some time we'll just see that it's what you're saying is just rubbish. um, and again, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining all the time, but there have been changes in the women's game that are good, that are positive, but there are still many, many things that have to be done.
And we'll talk a bit more about those challenges. But here's a quick reminder to our listeners. Himal Podcast brings you the best conversations with top thinkers on South Asia so you can understand this region, which is home to a quarter of humanity, better. Himal brings you cross border stories that you won't find anywhere else. It takes a lot to do this kind of in depth, independent journalism, and we rely on listeners like you. You can support the magazine by becoming a paying patron. Click on the link in the episode notes or go to our website himalmag.com and click on Support Himal. You can also sign up to our newsletters to keep up with our latest stories, events, and more. Now back to our conversation with Sharda Ugra. Sharda, as I mentioned earlier, Estelle Vasudevan wrote in Himal about how the growth of women's cricket in Sri Lanka has opened doors for women in adjacent fields. She writes about her own experience as a cricket journalist and a commentator. Is this something that you see across South Asia, whether it's in India or Pakistan, Bangladesh? Are more women entering sports journalism, commentating as physiotherapists or nutritionists to the team? Is the rise of women's cricket, the interest in women's cricket, actually opening doors across the board?
I think the rise of women's cricket will certainly have a ripple effect across the multitude of professions that there are in cricket to start with. I must point out, those were interesting, that the first batch of female journalists in cricket came from Pakistan. This was around the time I was still in college. I'm talking about the 1980s. And then you had sort of, and I think they're still there. With the advent of television and cable television, you do have a lot more women that are presenting uh, shows and programs and doing YouTube channels and all the rest of it. And I have to point out that there seem to be, this is just top of my head, more women in cricket in various fields in our part of the world than it is in the West. Let's say in India for sure. You will see a lot more women in a press box. You'll see them a lot doing, working in the allied industries that there are, as player managers, all these other things, as you would when compared to, say, England or Australia, which is quite remarkable given our whole society as it is. But I think the presence, if you can see it, you think you can be it. That kind of thing that's there in sport, and it's important for that to be coming through. What we don't see, which you do see in, say, the West a little bit, is the role and the presence of women in positions of authority in the boards. Board president, CEO of a particular state association, or whatever it is. You don't see that much. It's not a lot in the rest of the world as well, but you don't see that here. But what you will definitely get to see will be women coaches, women in coaching, women in like you said, in the support staff side as well, women commentators. And it's a fairly recent phenomenon. It's not something that's been going on forever. How they are handled by, say, the managers, how does television treat the presence of a woman in a commentary box? All those are still very kind of colored issues. They're not very sure. People do things differently, but just the fact that they're there is a big thing. And I think I remember. I mean, I read Estelle's story as well. Um, it's the whole thing about visibility, about presence, about being seen in that space, which is very important. And that's what the World Cup will do. Um, it's like that ripple effect that will follow. Someone will switch on the TV in some corner of our continent and say like, "Oh, I want to be this person," you know, someone in Nepal, someone in wherever, in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, wherever. And that's a very important. That's a thing to really hang on to.
Do you have a lot of younger women approaching you who are starting out or who want to get into sports journalism, coming to you for advice on how to navigate this field?
Yeah, I do. I do have a lot of conversations with young women. There are a lot of women that work in cricket. There are a lot of women who work in other sports and football. In India, in Olympic sports, there's a great interest in the Olympic sports that are there. There are women there. They don't need my advice. Largely, the ones who do, I do chat with them because the new generation is completely much more technologically savvy, much more savvy about a lot of other things in social media and how they present themselves. So there's a certain increase in that number. The cricket still remains like this sort of space that you really have to battle through to get in and do it. And I know that there are a lot of young women that are working in the background and struggling with sort of, you know, incompetent bosses and chauvinistic whatever, and but they're there, they're still fighting because they love the game that much, and they're interested in it, and they work really hard at it.
Also, the level of interest from parents who are enrolling daughters in cricket coaching, I mean, that's certainly increased, but how have you seen that evolve in recent years? And a second part of that question really is that girls didn't in the past, and they still don't play cricket in the gully or the playground after school. Most of them can only play cricket if it's in a formal coaching setup. Do you see this changing at all?
It's a very valid thing, Nayantara, what you're asking me about. The fact that can women recreationally access not just cricket, any sport in the public domain, in outside sort of formal coaching structure and so on, it'll be very, very hard to do. Because of the fact that you'll have to have so many conditions fall into place for you to be in that space. You obviously always have to have male friends around that whole area, so it's fine. You're sort of safe in that sense, and you'll also find that. I mean, I'll give a very very basic example. Even for women to be running on the road, just running as in jogging on the road is seen as a sign of oh, what is she trying to do, kind of, this does depend entirely on the societies where this is happening. Then, in some parts of the country, women playing sport is a normal thing. Say, for example, in Manipur, for example, and in others, it is not. In a state like Haryana, for women to go into formal coaching structures, to go into say, um, akhadas or gurukuls or whatever, it's become much more normal since say 2010 onwards because of the fact that you're seeing women athletes compete. But for women to be wanting to do just for fun, it's a very, very hard thing for our societies to sort of accept it. And you're not even talking, say, even in big cities, you've got, say, in Mumbai, for example, you have these net sort of cages in which you play at night, box cricket, and they're on the top of buildings or whatever it is. You're not going to have women coming and play there by themselves. Even in Mumbai, I'd be very, very surprised and very happy if I saw that happening in just for fun. Just a sense of playing for fun, that whole sense of just enjoying yourself. That's the thing that's I think that women are still fighting for that, to be able to have that chance to go out and it's like the whole why loiter kind of thing that was built up. That's still not there. If you see women playing a sport in an academy or whatever it is, it'll probably be there from a school, from a coaching. It's a much more formal approval structure, let us say. In that sense, that is good. But the good thing is that there are more and more coming from everywhere. So the kind of change that happened in the men's game at the turn of the century, at the advent of the 21st century, when television took cricket to small towns of India, and you started seeing high quality players coming from there. That's started to happen over a very short span of time, say from the 2017 push that happened with women's cricket. Um, you're seeing it to happen now. I mean, there is. I went to attend a session or to speak to some young girls about something, whatever related to it, a scholarship program. And they had something like 200 applications for this thing, women cricketers from everywhere. And they see we thought we get like 60, 80, they got like 200. A scholarship program or something else. It's just mad the numbers that are coming. It's like a wave upon wave upon wave of these girls that are coming in and they want to play. Because there's so much talent in the country. You're seeing it play out in the form of, of players on the team level. So it's just a wonderful time for young women who want to make their career in say, professional sport to at least try and push. And but if you want to go out and have fun, that's another matter.
But while on the subject of women's cricket and society, I think we have to talk about sexual harassment in women's sports, right? In 2015, there was the scandal in Sri Lanka where the news broke about women's players being asked to perform sexual favors in order to get spots on the team. Now, of course, this happens across sports around the world, right? Whether it's the US gymnastics team or women's wrestling in India. How big a concern or deterrent is this for women trying to play at the national level, particularly in cricket, in India and in South Asia?
It's the fact that it still happens globally across sport is terrifying sort of fact that it's still there. That had happened to the United States gymnastic team, which is the world's foremost sporting culture, so to speak, and 200 women found themselves being harassed by this guy. Is just the most earth-shaking story that I heard at the time because it actually put into context what it still means for women to go and play. And now we are not even talking about our society in which we live. I think that is a big factor that you're talking about. I did a story a couple of years ago on BCCI and so on, which was published in the Caravan, and one segment of it was about these women cricketers, about this particular cricket official and the women cricketers of that state and the kind of and I heard the conversation that he had with the player. Someone had recorded it on the girl's phone, and it was just so scary and so depressing. And nothing happened to that guy. Nothing happened to the cricket association. Nothing of that sort. It's still there. So there is that. That being said, women are trying to find a way to make their space and to find their way around it, to navigate that space, to try and protect themselves, their parents, their fathers, mothers, everyone who's going to come with them, and try and be clear and be sure. The other thing that has also happened is that there is amongst women athletes, I would say, a certain degree of confidence in how they project themselves and how they understand their bodily boundaries in that sense, their physical boundaries as to what can be crossed and what can't, which perhaps may not have happened 15, 20 years ago. We don't know. I mean, it's a hard thing to say. I'm just saying it optimistically that you think that girls are able to protect themselves, but how do you know? It is a big factor, and the disappointing part about it is that the official structures of our sports, whether it is cricket in India or across any part of, say, South Asia, you don't know how much the official structures are there to punish perpetrators. That's the most depressing part. That you and the people that are there are usually saying that, oh, it's these girls, they just, they don't understand. He was just being like a father and he was being like an uncle. I mean, but what are you saying? With the women's wrestlers story, the women's wrestlers protest, we saw it play itself out. These are people of the top level of that sport. They were like the absolute elite of the elite of that sport, and they still had to face this guy. And look at where we are now. So the point is that there is no protection for them is the scary part, because it's these guys that are running the sport, and they don't seem to want to address this in a really meaningful and a sort of emphatic way that it doesn't happen again. So it is a big factor.
So this is also a consequence of such few women in sports administration, right?
Huge, huge, because you have to be able to have, who do you go to? Who do you complain to? And who is there to say that this is wrong? And to point out. And so all these sporting organizations, you should look at their executive committees. There are women in there. They don't feel that. I mean, every time there's a change in sports policy, one says, oh, there should have been 4 women should be part of this group of 9, and they said no, 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 they made it 3 or some. It's like just baffling. It's like you're banging your head against a wall, and you're seeing this played out because it's a policy that's being made to protect men and keep them in that space. And how insecure do you have to be that you won't allow for women to be there and to speak? That is not to say that this will be a bulletproof sort of formula to stop athletes being sexually harassed or being bullied uh, or being abused also. But the point is just the presence of more women in positions are able to have this. You can have this conversation with them, yeah, in a way. So the International Olympic Committee, for example, has a very very good toolkit talking about these things. And it is done very clearly. And if you really have the right intent, you should be able to put structures in place to protect your young athletes. But we are in a situation where nobody seems to want to protect those young athletes because they seem to think that the people that are looking after them are perfect, which they're not.
Although we have been talking about the World Cup, I think we also need to talk about the one team that's not participating in the World Cup but cannot, and that's Afghanistan. And it's an incredible and a very sad story, but they're literally a team in exile now after the Taliban came back to power. They played their first match in 3 years, I think, earlier this year. And now they've come as spectators. I think they watched a few of the World Cup matches. Have you been watching this team, Sharda, and what's going on with them? And what is their future like?
So I know the story of the Afghan women's team quite well because one of the players there, Benafsha Hashimi, I've known her from the time that a little before before the Taliban took over, and then the story of how they were evacuated to Australia with their families, and you understand what the sport means to them and how playing it, how important it is. And you also understand the politics that have come into play because the Taliban is now in power. You know the story about the Taliban and the women journalists in Delhi, for example. And I want to know what is going to happen if you want to have cricket in the Olympics. Another fundamental sort of point, one of the fundamental rules of an Olympic sport is that men and women have to play it both. Both men and women play that sport, whatever it is. And every Olympic contingent has to have a woman participant there. Has to, not just a participant there. So you'll see that, and it's part of their charter and their rules and so on. So I don't know what's going to happen when it comes to Afghanistan. So say Saudi Arabia now cannot go to an Olympic Games without female competitors, or any of the other countries that may not support women playing sport at all. But the Olympics says we won't. But what will happen in the case of Afghanistan, we don't know. The women that are there. I think every time you speak to them, you realize how frustrating it is. At the same time, how defined they are. And for example, there are still women players in Afghanistan who are trying to play in some way or trying to do. I mean, it's just terrifying to think about what consequences can be for those women if they get found out. And particularly in our part of the world, in South Asia, for example, why do people find sport something with which to restrict women or punish them or whatever? Because the female's control over her body and what she's able to do with that body, which usually is a symbol of shame and honor and all that other nonsense that goes with it. The freedom women get from using their body in an athletic activity, once their mind just starts ticking and they say, this is what my body can do, then it kind of just opens their whole world out. And that is what, say, people that are the traditionalists and the absolute medieval reminded people that they are in South Asia, there must be many. That's what they fear. That sort of freedom and that liberty, that's what they fear. All the time when you have conversations with athletes in India that come from villages and smaller towns and so on, they like to wear shorts and t-shirts and run and do that kind of thing. Everyone thinks, why are you doing it? How dare you do it? But they say, yeah, no one can run faster than me in my village, or no one can fight better than me in my village. You're not supposed to be doing that as women. And you think of the situation in Afghanistan, it's sort of magnified and intensified that 100 times over. And so that's why it's important for cricket to take it up and to say that let's find a way. So when the women came here in India, I went across to meet Binafsha, and I went across to meet her teammates as well. Um, we were not supposed to say that they were the Afghanistan women's team. You're not allowed to say that because technically it was very messy and who knows what and so on. But that's who they were, you know. And it was kept as quiet as possible. Whereas they should have been out there with crowd cheering, everyone clapping and celebrating for them. But it's because of the fact that it's diplomatically messy and it's difficult. That's why nothing could be done. And we should not forget them. I think we should try and follow whatever they're doing, whatever people are doing for them, and we have to keep
Right.
track of what's happening, not forget about them.
Final few questions. Sharda, let's come back to the tournament itself. Any predictions? Who do you expect to see in the final?
Oh God, I'm very bad at this. Okay, my ideal final, it may not happen. It should be South Africa versus
Mhm.
India, and then may the better team win. So that's my that's my dream final. I don't know how it'll work out, but yeah, I'm not very good at this. But yeah.
And do you have like a current favorite player to watch or top three that you're enjoying their game?
I'm enjoying watching Kranti Gaur. I think she's fabulous. She's from Madhya Pradesh, where my mom comes from. And so I like all these girls that have come through. Sri Charni, they've come from nowhere. They're not known names. They're not this thing. Amanjot, Pratika Rao, all these young names that are there, which are showing you this whole burgeoning of talent. So this is literally like, so there was a time in Indian cricket, say from 2006 to 2015 or so, that the whole generation of players there, it's like that, it's literally like the vanished generation, the lost generation. All the women who played at that time, the BCCI had taken over control of women's cricket, and then they pretended they didn't need to be there, and they forgot about them. So then you had Mitali was there or thereabout. She came through slightly towards the end of that, and then she became the star, and Julan and all of them. Then Smriti, then Harleen, and now and Harmanpreet, and now you've got these younger players that are coming through. So I love watching the young players to see what they do, and yeah, I enjoy seeing that. I mean, I shouldn't only be saying Indian players, but yeah, a little bit biased in that. I love the Bangladesh girls as well, the quick bowlers. Um, yeah, I like some of them.
Yeah.
Akhtar, I saw her play in one game. She was fantastic. So I think and Jyoti, I like Jyoti to watch Jyoti as well because she's got a lot of spark, spirit about her. Yeah.
What do you hope the women's game in South Asia looks like in, say, 10 years?
Optimistically, I would want them to be amongst, say, the top six in the game. I'd want the Pakistan, Sri Lankan, and Bangladeshi women to do much better. I'd want us to play. I want India to play them much more. um, Triangulars, quadrangulars, whatever it is. I mean, I thought the situation that happened that they about the handshaking of the women was so tragic that the women had to follow through what the nonsense that the men had done at the Asia Cup and not shake hands, which is just, I mean, ludicrous. And I was told that there was a lot of awkwardness in that match because the Pakistani players wanted to speak to the Indian stars that were there, and they were just getting no attention. Like they were not being responded to. Whereas in the normal situation, you had that lovely photograph of Bisma Maru's baby and all the Indian players getting excited and taking pictures of it. And now it is all some other crap that had been, passed on to us by the men's game, or which had been passed on from, who knows, government authorities, the phones from whichever government office in Delhi to the Indian team, men's cricket team coach. So that made me feel sad, but I want there to be a certain sense of uh, community exchange, conversations, a lot more sort of and coverage about the women's game. And I would want, to be fair, the Indian Cricket Board has supported the Afghanistan men's team. I would want them to support the Afghanistan women's team if they could, to support players in the region as well. I know the Nepal has a great cricket culture, and there's a great enthusiasm for the game there. I want to see the women play. I want to see the women come through as well. Yeah, that's my.
And last question, Sharda, can I ask you for three recommendations? These can be books or movies or podcasts to really tell us about women's cricket in South Asia or women's sport in general.
I think the books to read about women's sport are, there's a book called She Dared, which is a series of profiles about Indian women athletes, and the great book written by Ayushi Putran on the Pakistani women's cricket team. It's called Unveiling Jadba. And that's a good book to read as well. Then there's, of course, the two big books on women's cricket: The Fire Burns Blue by Siddhant Patnaik and Karanya Keshav. Suprita Das has a great book called Free Hit, which is also about women's cricket, which you must read. I would like listeners to follow the work of Tracy Holmes, who's an Australian journalist who has worked with with the Afghanistan women's team, and follow her programs, follow her podcast. She works for the ABC. Yeah, so that's my lot.
Sharda, thank you so much for those recommendations and thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the chat, Nayantara. Thank you so
That was Sharda Ugra on the State of South Asia podcast. You'll find Sharda's recommendations and much more in the episode notes. If you liked this episode, leave us a comment or write to us at editorial@himalmag.com. Tell us what you want to hear about on this podcast. Don't forget to tune in to the South Asia Review of Books with Himal's Shweta Srikantan. You can listen to her conversation with writers like Amrita Mahale on her new book, Real Life, and with Atish Tasir on his book, A Return to Self, Excursions in Exile. You'll find all this on the Himal South Asian podcast channels on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You can also catch up with our special podcast series, Saffron Siege, hosted by the peace activist Harsh Mandar, on the 100-year legacy of the RSS and its corrosion of public life in India. This episode was edited by Ritika Chauhan. We'll be back soon with another in-depth conversation on the next episode of State of South Asia with me, Nayantara Narayanan. Thank you for listening and see you then.